miraculous recovery from COVID-19 by a native Rhode Islander while in the Mountain West, and the petty politics of medicine. Welcome to In the Dugout. My name is Mike Stenhouse, and momentarily we'll discuss these issues with our guest, Mr. Lyle Morse. Now, you know our format on the show, because we're in the dugout, replicating my years, many days and many pounds ago when we would sit in the dugout and talk about life before a game. So I've got my goofy Red Sox shirt on because I'm celebrating what I hope is going to be opening day for baseball a week from today on Friday, next Friday, the 24th. But I've got another surprise for you when we bring on our guests when it comes to our sports logos and teams. For many decades, many have theorized that health and medicine have, like almost everything else, become hopelessly politicized. My memory of such began with the critiques of the infamous food pyramid. Remember that back 50, 60 years ago, which supposedly told us how much of grains and fruit and protein and dairy-based products we were supposed to eat each day if humans were to remain healthy. The theory was, the conspiracy theory, which I think was true, said that the food pyramid was not based on science, but rather on politics and money, where the agricultural lobby successfully, apparently, over-recommended how much grain we should consume. They wanted more grain to be harvested and sold. We now know that too much grain and too much white wheats can be harmful with high levels of carbohydrates. More recently, rumors are rampant that many low-cost and common cures might actually exist for diseases such as cancer, but the medical industry doesn't want you to know about those. They squash that science and they squash the publicity so that more expensive and profitable treatments, procedures, and hospitalizations can continue. Terrible if true. A few years ago in Rhode Island, we had a major debate about the safety of the HPV vaccine and whether or not our children's school attendance should be contingent on whether or not they took this controversial vaccine. And there's already rumors about the pending vaccine for the coronavirus. Think about it. We're talking about hundreds of millions of doses in America and billions around the world, or put another way, hundreds of billions of dollars. So it makes sense that some of this could become politicized, as might have happened with the drug we're going to talk about later in our show, hydroxychloroquine, the common anti-malaria drug and anti-lupus drug that's become a political football just because President Trump talked about it and President Trump actually took the drug. So the real question here is whether or not we can believe anything we're hearing in the media about any of this science or this data that we're being fed on a daily basis. One day it's one thing, the next day it's another thing, different news outlets promoting different stories. We don't know what to believe. I don't know what to believe, but more on that later. First, let's bring on our guest, Lyle Morse, and let's hear his miraculous story about his recovery from COVID-19. Lyle, you're in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Welcome to our show. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling much better now. Thank you.
That's great. All right, so our tradition, you've been pre-warned. Now I've got my goofy Red Sox shirt on, and I'm going to go even more eclectic, and instead of the blue and red, I'm going with the green and gold of my Green Bay Packers hat, because I know what you're going to be putting on. What do you got there for us?
I've got my lucky New England Patriots hat.
Packers, Patriots, last time we met in the Super Bowl, guess who won? I got you on that one. All right, Lyle, listen, so you're a Rhode Island native.
Yes.
You've been working for about the last 7 years as an executive chef, a regional chef for a corporate hotel chain, and that puts you in Jackson Hole, Wyoming for most of the year, right?
That is correct, yes. Yeah, beautiful Jackson Hole. Number one ski resort in the United States.
I want to get there, but not to ski. I want to get there and just do some hiking around there. But I'm sure there's plenty of that, too, to do. So backdrop stuff. You're going into this year, you're healthy, 50-something-year-old guy, no pre-existing conditions, no comorbidities, as we've learned. And then tell us what happened in early March.
Well, the end of March is, it's at the end of the shoulder season. A lot of the transients are out of town. Jackson Hole's a little tiny town population is not anything what it would be in, back in Rhode Island in the suburbs. And so, COVID was just really not on the radar for me. We had a little bit about it in the news, and a lot of the things we hear in Jackson are, a week or two later than what we get on the East Coast. We're not really in the limelight of the current affairs. And so it was never something that was on my mind. As I said, I cycle, I ski, I watch what I eat. So I'm generally a fairly healthy individual. And so it was probably about the second week of March, I began to feel tired, very tired. I had a horrible backache. And then I began to develop a nagging cough that just would not go away.
Now,
So
at that time, Lyle, was Wyoming under any kind of lockdown or anything like that?
Nothing. Like I said, it wasn't even discussed. It was not on anybody's mind here.
Okay, keep going. Yeah.
So
you're
I
tired,
had
you're coughing. Yeah.
I had a doctor's appointment coming up. I was getting a little concerned, so I had reached out to the hotline. They did not want anybody going to the hospital or to the walk-in care centers. They had want you to call the hotline if you had concerns about having symptoms. But I didn't really use that as a tool. I knew I had a doctor's appointment coming up within a week. And at that time, I would run the symptoms and what I was experiencing through my primary care physician at that time. And so he took my temperature. He said, I don't really think that you are exhibiting any of the typical symptoms of a COVID, virus. And so let's proceed with the biopsy. We did. And, things didn't really progressively get worse until it was about a week later. And I called again and notified them that, listen, I'm getting worse. 2 days later, they finally called me back and said, well, maybe you should go to the hospital and get tested. And that's what I did.
And you had described to me that, I don't know if it was right before you took your test or right afterwards, but you were so tired that you were standing there and pretty much just collapsed.
Yeah, so they have the tent out in the parking lot. I pulled up. They instructed me to stay in the car. Nurses came out. They had taken me to where the back entranceway to the emergency room was. So they had me wait outside. As I was waiting there, to the support columns because I felt like I was going to pass out. And I began to really lose kind of track of time. So the nurse finally came out. She got me, brought me into the examining room, got me ready. They had brought me in and I had lungs and they scanned them and everything was kind of beginning to become tunnel vision at that point. They brought me back to the examining room, and at that point, everything that I was beginning to hear, the voices that were talking to me was as though they were talking to me in a tunnel. Everything, the lights began to dim, and I literally at that point passed out.
So I guess one of the things we should note is in some people how stunningly quickly you can go from functional to non-functional with this, right? I mean, literally a matter of minutes, this sounds like with you, right?
It was within an hour or two of me arriving at the hospital. I later learned that I had what they call sleeping hypoxia, where because I was in such great physical condition, I didn't exhibit any of the outward symptoms of being hypoxic. And so that was really what the doctors were critically aware of and concerned about.
And was it at that point they had diagnosed you with double pneumonia? Or did that come later?
Correct. I had pneumonia in both lungs, and my blood oxygen level was...
We're still in Jackson Hole now, right?
Correct. I was still at St. John's Medical Center.
Now, your doctor was concerned about keeping you there, right?
Correct. I had a blood oxygen level of about 65. They couldn't even understand how I was awake at that point.
So she made the decision to get you to a bigger, better hospital. Correct.
Yeah, the hospital here is known for orthopedics because it's a ski town.
Oh yeah.
Really not really for long-term critical care as far as cardiopulmonary goes. And so she made the call at about 9 o'clock that night. She reached out to my family and said, we need to get him to another hospital that could better, it's better.
I mean, they're afraid of you dying right now, right?
Yes. They actually intubated me and put me on a ventilator at that point.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Yes.
So
And so
you were medevaced, helicoptered about the 70 miles over by the Crow's Flight to Idaho Falls,
that
right?
is correct. So they called medevac. The life flight came in. At this point, I was unconscious. I didn't know anything that was going on or what happened. So I later learned that they had medevac me to the Idaho Falls Regional Medical Center out in Idaho Falls.
My goodness. So so how did it lead up to, what happened there, and then as we presaged in our opening, you were finally given the hydroxychloroquine drug. But tell us, once you got to Idaho Falls, were you awake and made that decision yourself? Or how
No,
did that
so I was not conscious until 10 days later after my
Oh,
arrival at Idaho Falls. I was unconscious the whole time. They
10 days.
sedated me heavily on medication, and
Was your wife out there?
no, they're all back. My whole family's back on the East Coast. So they called my wife, and they had told her that I was in critical condition. I was crashing very quickly, and they gave me a 30% chance to survive.
30%.
Yes.
So they're expecting you to die at this point. My God.
Yeah.
So how long after you got to Idaho Falls was the decision made to administer the hydroxy to you, and how did they do that?
From what I was told, it was about 15 to 18 hours after I had arrived. I was continuing to decline in my health and my oxygen ability for my lungs to process the oxygen. And as a last resort, the doctors had informed my family that they were going to try the hydroxychloroquine as the last ditch effort.
It was their suggestion or your wife's?
It was their suggestion. My wife had mentioned it, and he said, "We've already covered that base. We're going to go that route if it looks like he is not going to pull through."
Your poor wife.
Yeah.
Imagine not even being able to be near you. Of course,
No,
even if she
couldn't
was,
talk
she
to
wouldn't have been
family.
allowed in the room, right?
Yeah, and they wouldn't allow anybody there. They had no phone calls or nothing. So, she was calling, getting my prognosis. My sister was, my whole family was really concerned.
And how long after they administered the hydroxychloroquine would you say, based on what you were told, did you start to show?
It was about 18 hours after I turned the corner.
Wow. And then,
Yeah.
but it wasn't over then. You were, I mean, God, if you're in a coma for basically, was it a coma? We call it a coma?
I was in a drug-induced coma for nine days, and I remember on the 9th day I could hear voices talking to me, and at that point I think I was in the process of trying to take my breathing tube, my feeding tube out. I was not knowing what it was, and so they actually had to they had to restrain me. And I remember the nurse saying, you have one more day, just hang in there one more day. This is, helping you breathe. And tomorrow is the day we're going to get you off this ventilator. So that was really the turning point in which, I was able to get off the ventilator and begin breathing on my own.
But because your body had gone through such trauma, you were still going to remain in the hospital for many more weeks to come, right?
Right. So I was in the critical care unit. They put me from there into the ICU, and I was in ICU for about 10 days.
But at that point, you were well on the road to recovery. It was just going to take some time. There wasn't any more concern about losing you at that point?
No, they were still concerned. Things
Okay.
could go back and turn quickly because I even off the ventilator, I had a hard time breathing. It was very hard to get any air in my lungs. I couldn't talk. I couldn't walk. I couldn't eat, and I couldn't drink. I had to, my body had to relearn how to do all of that. So I went through.
Wait a minute. Not even any alcohol?
Well, I was hoping I could do that, but they wouldn't let me have any.
All right, so I need you to knock me down a peg or two here, right? So I'm a little bit older than you. I'm probably not even as in good a shape as you, but I'm in pretty good shape. What do I have to? I'm a healthy guy. I don't have any pre-existing conditions. Even if I catch it, well, what's the big deal? What do you say to an idiot like me? Nope. Lyle, we're losing you here.
I was in the same mindset. You think you're healthy and you're not going to contract the virus. But, people that I speak to today, especially those that are anti-mask or anti-glove, they really need to think about every aspect of their day, where they go, social distancing, who they run into, staying away from large groups. You know, a lot of people think that's just conspiracy theory, hobnob, but quite honestly, it's ironic how many people here in Jackson Hole that come through town and into our hotel do not wear masks.
Mm.
And when you ask them to put a mask on, you know, they're like, we are well aware of the, you know, the requirements, and I'm still not going to wear a mask. So, you know, I wish I could tell them the story, my personal story, and have them walk in my shoes for a day.
Well, I think that's
But-
one of the reasons we wanted to have you out here, is for people like me to have maybe a reality check on this thing.
Right. And, you know, people think that they're immune, and they're not. This is not anything like a typical flu, which a lot of people say the strain is associated with the flu and colds and all that, but it's far more indiscriminatory on all age demographics. It doesn't matter if you're young, you're middle-aged, or you're old. Doesn't matter, as they say, if you have underlying health conditions. In my case, you know, I did have an underlying health condition, but, you know, I take good care of myself. And, you know, it's just the younger millennials think that they're immune to what's going on. And if I could just say, you know, it's so critical that, you know, they wash their hands and they follow all the protocols that state government, local governments are establishing. It's going to, you know, potentially prevent them from getting sick.
All right, one last question for you before we turn to the politics of this. Any extended impacts, effects on your health now that you were a couple of months removed from your recovery?
Right. When I was in the hospital, my leg swelled up in the last couple of weeks that I was in the ICU, and they attributed that to being in bed. But as they later have learned, and this is really a learning process from day to day and week to week, month to month, that there are underlying conditions that most COVID patients have, the ones that were critical. And the biggest one is blood clots. And so I am constantly battling right now the blood clots, because, you know, this virus actually thickens your blood, and it can cause blood clotting, and especially, you know, your extremities, your legs are the most prominent area. So, you know, that's what I'm currently under the doctor's care for.
Well, Godspeed with that. So then there are some other idiots, in addition to me, out there, just to use the phrase loosely, who either want you to believe that just because President Trump talked about the drug hydroxychloroquine, that everyone else should avoid it, and that people like you maybe would die if you didn't have it. If your doctor and hospital had been of that mindset, is there any question in your mind that you wouldn't be here?
I know undoubtedly that had they not given me that drug at the time when, you know, things were really bad for me, there's a very high probability that I would not be here today.
I mean, it's really you know, I'm idiotic, as I just mentioned, but this petty politics, how we can politicize people's lives and possible treatments for them just to make a political point. I mean, what do you say about that?
Well, you know, I'm politics aside, you know, whether you're Democrat or Republican, you know, and what your beliefs are, you know, I do see certainly that the hydroxychloroquine has received a bad rap, and a lot of it is because of the president, you know, touting its benefits, and anything the president has said seems lately that he's going to get pushback on it. But politics aside, I think that it has saved my life. And, you know, the big debate is the
Remdesivir, yeah.
Remdesivir. You know, the cost per dose is extremely high. And so a lot of professionals and people in the industry, pharmaceuticals, say that, you know, they're pushing that drug specifically because of the probability that pharmaceutical companies are going to make a lot of money on that, as opposed to the hydroxychloroquine, which is only about 60 cents per dose.
And you're right. So that's a great segue. It's not just about politics. It's also about money, right? I mean, hydroxychloroquine, like you said, is common. It's been around for decades. It's very low cost. And nobody knew anyway is going to get rich off of it. But with remdesivir, with maybe some other treatments that come along, again, when we're talking about millions or billions of doses and treatments, that's a lot of money to be made. So you got to wonder if besides petty partisan politics, if money politics from the big drug companies and the medical establishment is playing a role in this. Well, Lyle, so you're back and forth. I know you were recently in Rhode Island. The issue we talked about with the reason we brought you on this week is because just 2 days ago, the Wall Street Journal did a major editorial on the politics of hydroxychloroquine. In fact, I think we have one slide on that. I should have asked to bring it up earlier. Let's show the second slide, Larry, if we can. There's the first one. There's the headline. And the second one talks about how the scientific basis for the criticism of hydroxychloroquine, which we all heard about because they just wanted to make a point against the president, that scientific basis now appears to be faulty. Remember, first it was authorized for emergency use, then it was shot down, and now a couple of more peer-reviewed studies saying, wait a minute, maybe this hydroxy really works. So Lyle, we are so thrilled that politics didn't get in the way of your life-saving recovery. We thank you for being with us today. And do you have any final thoughts for the people of Rhode Island?
Well, I think, you know, for this to happen to me, I really truly believe I was in perhaps the best place I could be, because the people out at the Regional Falls Medical Center in Idaho, they really saved my life, undoubtedly.
Well, let's tip our caps to all the medical workers and and all those other responders who did work to save your life. We're so grateful to them, as I know you and your family are. Lyle, God bless. I hope that blood clot takes care of itself quickly and that you're totally fine. But thank you for being with us, and congratulations on your great recovery.
Well, Mike, thanks for having me on. Been a pleasure.
For Mike Stenhouse, this is In the Dugout. We'll see you next inning. Right, Lyle.